Hi everyone, welcome back to Babbling Irons. So, Sloth, we've been introduced once again to a perpetual link, which is Armando Broja or Broja. He, has been linked against the West Ham. £30 million apparently is the figure. This was brought about by an article in the London Football, which talking about obviously Chelsea looking at Victor Osimhen. Obviously, Chelsea at the moment trying to buy up as much talent as they possibly can and be a bit of a player farm. And obviously, certain players are going to be surplus to that, one of them being Broja. So, first off, Sloth, what are your thoughts on the links? Do you think it has any kind of validity, and especially in light of some of the talk coming out about Moyes potentially not being here next season? Do you see this as a deal that's even going to go through before we even get into our thoughts and feelings on Broja as a player?
No, just to be blunt, I think it's nonsense. I think £30 million is a bit of a joke fee, and that's nothing against Broja. He's more than got the potential to be a £30 million player, but he's not playing. He's just come back from injury. All the signs that he's not lost any pace or anything are there. He looks sharp, and when he has featured, he's been quite good for them. But I just think £30 million is an absolute joke fee for a player who's not featured much.
Yeah.
And look, he's got the quality, and Chelsea can demand what they want. But I think in terms of it being a serious link, it's not. It's just not. I can't see Tim Staten letting that happen, and I can't see Sullivan parting ways with £30 million for a player who is not playing football.
Yeah, and as you say, not playing football. He's played 97 minutes only this season.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's coming back from his ACL. As you say, it's fortunately doesn't look like he's lost any pace, which is obviously the major thing. But obviously, once you've done your ACL once, there's always that concern that there's now quite a substantial weakness there, and that he can come back. We have seen it in the past with players. Just look at Zaniolo, who's now at Aston Villa. He's done his ACL, I think, 3 times now, twice in one knee and one in the other. Once that essentially becomes that structural problem in your knee, you're always going to be susceptible to, and potentially other injuries as well off the back of it. So I would say for £30 million on a player who's played 97 minutes this season, last season, obviously, as we know, was out due to the ACL. He's scored 1 goal already this year, scored 1 goal last year before his ACL went. And I think his best scoring was in the Eredivisie, where he got about 11 goals, I think 3 assists. Obviously, Southampton, which probably where many people were remembering his time, scored 9 goals as well. So again, it's not really prolific. And we've also got to remember when he was at Southampton, he did play as part of a 2. So there is that point as well as to, is he a player that suits our whole kind of philosophy as a centre forward, or does he only support parts of it because of his ability to press, to run, to chase into the channels, and also use his pace, and because of his physical size? Does he, in many ways, epitomise what Moyes wants in a player? However, fundamentally, he's still lacking in those areas. And do you think that's something that could be maybe trained or taught to be what Moyes would want? And I also had this again because I saw it in something else. Do we not already potentially have a player who can do this in our youth team that's not being used?
I think he's got all the ability and potential to be a really great forward. He definitely fits the Arnautovic mold of physical size, pace, and ability on the ball. So I have no doubt that if he were to join, he'd probably do quite well. I just think there's far better ways to spend the money. And as you mentioned, we've got a player who's 6 foot, strong, quick in the youth team who's not getting a look in. And look, I'm not going to say too much about Mubama. I think, if I'm being honest, I think it sounds like it's an agent issue and the agent wanting to get money before the agent rules change. So I don't know how much West Ham can do about that, and how much of that is bad management, bad people in his life helping him with his decisions, or just greedy people. It's a difficult situation. So Mubama is a tough one for me. I think regardless, he should be trying to force his way into the first team, and clearly Moyes isn't seeing enough of that if he's not featuring. So it's a tricky one with regards to him. Personally, I think Moyes is a manager who would pick him if he was good enough, and if he was really pulling up trees in training sessions. I can't see why he wouldn't unless he's been told not to. But I don't really think he's that type of person to pay too much attention to that. I think if you're good enough, he's going to play you. If you can turn a manager's season from finishing 10th and a good run in Europa to potentially finishing 5th and winning Europa, no manager's going to turn that down. They're not going to, just because they've been told to. They're not going to do that. So I don't really think there's much worth in that comparison, because at the end of the day, I do think if push came to shove and we had to play Mubama, or if he was forcing his way into the side, we would be seeing a bit more of him.
I do think we did see maybe the slight like that. Maybe the fascination with Danny Ings is starting to wear off. We did see them won a European games that, again, the obligatory final minute subs, but Mubama did come on over Ings. Maybe that's, again, as we've said with Moyes before, it's a bit like a Mourinho in the sense he likes players that are already fairly proven to be in the team. He tends to rely on those more, which is fair enough. It's a job where results that come into play. So maybe that's part of that's kind of judged that. And, speaking of Danny Ings, what is going to happen if Broja is a genuine target and comes in? What does that mean for his future at the club? Because you would suggest that there is going to be some sort of cut price deal West Ham are going to look to do to get Danny Ings out, potentially with even maybe subsidising some of his wages, because that has been a catastrophic deal. And I do in some ways worry that if we went for Broja with out of 30 million, it could be much the same. He's not prolific. He's not necessarily entirely well suited to what Moyes is asking. He does aspects, like we say, he's very good at running channels, decent technically. Obviously, he's going to be coming from Chelsea. He's not prolific in front of goal. And again, just coming off of a major injury, and we're a club that struggles with keeping players fit.
I think for me, he's almost the ideal Antonio replacement in that he's not prolific. Antonio's not prolific. He is a massive, strong unit. Antonio's a strong unit. And he's very quick. Antonio's very quick. So he is almost a like-for-like replacement. But for me, look, I think Danny Ings is the worst transfer in our Premier League era. I
remember Savio Neresco. That was pretty appalling.
But Savio didn't cost this amount of money and have these monstrous wages. Like, let's face it, he was a fart in a hurricane in comparison to 150 grand a week that is constantly being flushed down the toilet. And it's it's a tricky one, because I do think Broja would come in and be good for us, particularly off the bench. If we're looking at moving Bowen into more of a centre forward role, and even while Broja's getting fit, getting those minutes under his belt, coming off the bench for the final 15 minutes, he's a wrecking ball, and he's going to cause players nightmares. But it's for me, the £30 million mark is absolutely absurd. You know, we were talking yesterday about Aiko Adams. We could get him for that. If you look at Sergio Guirassy, you know, £17 million release clause, you could potentially say 17 million to Stuttgart, here's 3 million quid for you, and you've still got 10 million pounds to go out and do something. You know, look at someone from the Championship, look at an exciting winger down there.
Auburn, you know, who was incredible last year. Obviously, he hasn't been as tearing up trees as much.
Well,
as
he's picked up a couple of. He's picked up a red card or two, so he's not.
Yeah, he's been a bit questionable this year. But again, there are players within Europe who are, as you say, at a much less wage, who have been performing. Obviously, we saw one of those in Boniface, who've been recently linked as well, who was a player we could have picked up in the summer for a decent fee, and a lot less than Broja, who's coming off the back of an ACL injury. And that's also the point as to Chelsea refused to sell at 30 million because they believe they could get about 50 million if they put him out on loan. Obviously, he picked up his ACL. They've now brought in the likes of Jackson. They're looking to bring in Osman, and really they're essentially looking for a club to fund that next deal. And again, it seems fanciful at the moment to ask for £30 million for a player who only has 9 Premier League goals, just suffered an ACL, and is only, again, 97 minutes this season as well. Is quite a problem, but you can also, again, you can argue. Sorry, it's 160 minutes. Sorry, he's played this season, not 90.
I think if we want a player off Chelsea who is young and homegrown, go for Maatsen. You know, smashed it at Burnley last season. He will provide left back cover. It will allow us to get rid of Cresswell, and it will also allow cover for Ben Rama when he goes and to AFCON. Yeah. And on that left wing position, you know, you can have the link up of Maatsen and Emerson. You can have him as injury cover as well. So for me, that's the one we should be looking at, not Broja. I think
Maatsen would be in his last 6 months of his contract as well. So it would be
exactly. So potentially you could get Guirassy and Maatsen for around that £30 million mark. And for me, that is just that is an absolute no-brainer. It's levels above signing one homegrown player for us in comparison to you know 30 million quid on Broja. And it's nothing against Broja. As I said, I think he'd really work for us, particularly if he's going to be used in that Arnie sort of mold. But it's just the money involved, I think, is farcical.
Yeah. So for you to look at this as a deal, if you was in the play, what would you say is an acceptable feel for Broja at this time?
Well, what I say is acceptable. Oh, bloody hell. I mean, I think when you've played so little football after a big injury, I wouldn't be looking at spending more than 15 or 18 million pounds. Like, it's a tricky one, because when you look at the market and when you look at the value that you can get, you know, I just mentioned Guirassy for 17 million pounds. Whether or not he'd want to come is a different thing altogether. However, I think when you have the chance to offer big wages, European football, and, you know, potentially a big signing on fee, then players' minds can change at the drop of a hat. So I think there's a lot of value out there. There's the big forward at Victoria Plitzen, who he is injured, but Frankfurt are sniffing around as well. He's rumoured to cost about 12 million quid.
The last striker Frankfurt bought didn't turn out so badly for them either, did he?
Well, they didn't even pay a fee for him. No, they signed him on, and he's another one that we both recommended in Kolo Muani. So I think it is a tricky one. I wouldn't be paying more than £15 million, but I would be very open to a loan to buy potentially, you know, for about £25 million. I think if you can get his fitness, and there are very key stipulations on how we trigger that, whether it's
based on games played, goals scored, is what kind of gets you to that point where you have a mandatory or optional figure. I think Chelsea would say they'd want a mandatory figure based on, say, appearances, etc. And I think that's probably the thing to do if you're going to do that. I think if we're going to buy Broja, in my opinion, like I say, I think 15 to 18 million would be the top I'd go to. And then if we had to, if there was no way you could kind of get this deal other than paying 30, I think then you make it heavily incentivized based on number of minutes played, number of goals scored. And I think you weigh it on those performance-based metrics that if he does then hit those metrics, then you don't mind paying the £30 million. And I think that's how you maybe would have to, in my mind, how I would do this. Again, to your point earlier, I don't think this is a deal that's going to happen purely because Moyes' future is deemed somewhat open for discussion and potentially not being kind of viewed as next year. And as we know, Broja is very much a Moyes type player, a player that he really wanted over Scamacca last time round. I think the only way this happens is a deal is a loan. In my opinion, I don't think we will spend 30 million, and I don't think Chelsea will accept anything other than a sell because they are looking at Osimhen. So
I think the Chelsea situation is a funny one because it will depend on what they can do. You know, if they can shift, if we were to offer £15 million for Maatsen, and you know they will have to sell a couple more as well to sign someone like Osimhen. You know, he's going to take a huge transfer fee, and whether or not he wants
100 million, isn't it? Let's face it.
Yeah. Whether or not he actually wants to join Chelsea, who don't have Champions League football, don't have any kind of European football, as opposed to, say, you know, he was linked with Real Madrid the other day, or even Bayern Munich. You know, Bayern Munich, if they're looking at getting rid of Sane in the summer, they could change their system and potentially have Harry Kane and Osimhen, which is probably the scariest strike force in Europe. Yeah. And let's face it, if they want to compete in the Champions League, they need to do something different because
they need a radical change, and that would be a radical change that would put the fear of God into any defense to play against those two players.
Even say PSG, you know, PSG, if they're looking at losing Mbappe, it's a case of they could go for Osimhen and they could persuade him. So I don't really know about the Chelsea link, to be honest. I think he probably turns them down anyway.
I think at this point, probably, yeah. I think the only driving force would be the financial package that he would be offered would be incredibly substantial. But bring back to the whole Broja one. So I think, you know, what we're saying is that he is a decent player, and he could bring what Moyes maybe wants to the team to help see us through to the end of the year. But in terms of an actual £30 million signing, it seems aspirational at best when we talk about it from a journalistic point of view. I just don't see it happening. I only see a loan. But yeah, any final thoughts, Loft, before we finish?
I'd be really happy with him on loan, to be honest. I think that's it would potentially be the best for both parties because you can potentially look at him getting in the side and playing under a manager who can see the player there and, you know, has faith in him. But I just think if you're going to look to spend any money on him, you can't be spending that sort of big figure. I'd much rather go and get Guirassy or Akor Adams and someone who suits our system and is scoring goals. But I'm not going to shake my fist at it and say, "Oh." I'm just happy we actually are being linked with players who suit our system and not Danny Ings, not the kind of Jurge that we've already been seeing in previous seasons. So long may it continue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, to work out that it's fact it's November and we're obviously being proactive in what we're looking, and we seem to be very much certain that a strike is what we need, and we're making those moves. So it is positive. We may or may not agree with targets or even the fees, but what we can say is at least it looks like the club are being proactive, which is not something we've always said about West Ham leading up to these kind of important points of the season, such as January. So let's just hope we see the investment, and there's clearly going to be some money left over from the Declan Rice sales. So, you know, we're going fairly well in the league. Ish. We could do better, but we've got a good set of games coming up as well. So there is reason for optimism, and we could be in a good place come January. And if we can get in the right players and get the players that suit our system, then we really could have a good end to the season, and maybe a good farewell for Moyes. It may also be enough to justify him staying. We don't know, but it remains to be seen as to where we go with it. But yeah, if you like this video, guys, please do like, please do subscribe if you're new here. Please do share all of those wonderful, lovely things that kind of help us and help this channel. And yeah, guys, let us know your comments as well. Let us know, do you think Broja should be a great signing for West Ham? What would you be willing to pay for him? Or do you want us to look for other targets? But until next time, Sloth, there's one last thing to do, and that is
come on, you Irons.